Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining us on today's HIS Talk webinar, Charting a Course to Digital Transformation. Start your journey with a map and a compass. It is brought to you by Sutherland Healthcare Solutions. I'm Ashley from HIS Talk and I'll be moderating. I have a couple of housekeeping items to make you aware of before we start the webinar. Attendee phone lines have been muted to prevent background noise. Please use GoToWebinar's question box in the console to submit questions to our presenter at any time. The presenter will answer your questions during Q&A at the end. You may also use the chat function to send me a message or ask a question as well. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you will receive links to the recording as well as a PDF version of the PowerPoint presentation. Our speakers today are Jack Phillips, CEO at the International Institute for Analytics, along with Dr. Graham Hughes, CEO at Sutherland Healthcare Solutions. Today you'll hear first from Dr. Graham Hughes as an introduction, who will then turn the presentation over to Jack Phillips. With that, I will turn it over to our speakers.
Hey, thanks very much, Ashley. As Ashley mentioned, my name's Dr. Graham Hughes, and Chief Executive at Sutherland Healthcare Solutions. I'm a physician with 25 years worth of health IT experience in various roles, from CIO to EMR developer to Chief Medical Officer at SAS, the analytics firm, and now CEO at Sutherland, but more of that later. Just before we start, I do want to thank Ashley and the HIS Talk team for inviting us to share some of our thoughts with you today. And thank you as well for joining and taking time out of your schedules to spend time hearing what we have to say as well. So hopefully during this session you're going to find a couple of nuggets in what Jack and I cover that you can take back to your organizations to help move the needle on your digital journey. So every day technology is really delivering incredible experiences all around us. We can answer the doorbell from our phones while we're traveling. Satellites, apps, and phones work perfectly to help us avoid traffic and to get to work on time, whether we're in Tennessee or Tel Aviv. Our face is now our password, and our voice is now our PIN. So even through these effortless interactions, they have an abundance of digital complexity that lie behind them. We've stopped giving them a second thought. And if you think about your day-to-day world and how you're glued to your smartphone and the apps that you have on there, you'll understand that only too well. But if we stop for a second to look behind the ease of these experiences, underlying it all and driving it is process. As you well know, any of you who are involved in your own organizations in thinking through any form of digitally enabled transformation, it starts off with understanding the process, and the process is usually much more complex than the final solution hopefully will appear. So in terms of this being really rooted in process, just a bit of background and then I'll be introduce Jack, but Sutherland is a process transformation company. So whether you work for a hospital, IDN, physician group, or health plan, or a software company for that matter, we bring the same discipline and techniques that we've used to help Fortune 100 name brand companies from across retail, banking, and software transform their digital customer experiences. When we're involved in this process redesign, we'll frequently partner with customers on outcome-based contracts so that when you do well, we do well. And so the rationale really here is, and Jack, if you could just quickly step back, sorry about that, if you just step back to the prior slide, yeah, is that Jack and I go back and have worked together on a variety of analytics projects over the years. And so when I joined Sutherland, it was a natural fit for us to work with the premier organization in consulting around analytics, dedicated entirely to the analytics space, for us to marry our process excellence with their consultative analytic excellence to help you as you're thinking about redefining your digital journey. So we know that we have a glut of digital data, and as we're looking at this, obviously as we're using the data, we need to figure out how we can use it to help you with your transformational thinking. How do you design and re-engineer your processes? What is it that you can do to measure and compare your organization's analytic maturity compared to others? And then how do you develop a strategy that fits you rather than some other organization? So we know that we have a glut of digital data. You can't read any paper or any blog without coming across this. We have a massive amount of data about our patients and members. There are much more data out there that can help us build a more accurate profile based on readily available socio-demographic and behavioral data. So whether it's your clinical, administrative, financial information, supply chain, quality measures, internally, there's more data than you're probably already using. It's sort of lying there as dark data. But outside of your institution, there's social media data, consumer buying pattern data, geo-data, and so forth that many organizations haven't even started to leverage in healthcare, but is used on a day-to-day basis in other organizations. So the opportunities, as you can imagine, are endless, but of course, it's not just about the data or the technology. Many other organizations will stop at the opportunity, but not actually get into the weeds of how we actually go transform the process. So how should we prepare? Where do we start? How long will it take? How much will it cost? Do you have the talent in place to succeed? And how do you compare to your peers? Well, we believe that it takes a change in mindset, one that moves from piecemeal solutions to enterprise thinking. And for us, it starts with consulting to better understand and clarify the priorities, the business issues, the opportunity. Once a target's selected, it requires human-centered design thinking, which is a user-centric model for the way that we rethink processes. And then to actually make that and to transform that into action, we need to have appropriate platforms as well as analytic insights that can be then developed upon those platforms. So these are just some of the questions that we help our customers answer by providing tools and services that act as the map and compass to help you navigate this digital maze. So we're going to talk about a number of different areas. I'm going to hand over to Jack now, and it's a great pleasure to introduce Jack Phillips, who I've worked with for a number of years. He's the CEO and founder of the International Institute for Analytics, IIA for short, and Jack's going to explain how IIA helps world-class organizations on their analytic journey, and he's going to give us examples from the healthcare domain to help flesh that out. Jack, over to you.
Great, Graham. Thanks very much, and it's really a pleasure to be with you and the Sutherland team on this call today. I have great optimism about our partnership going forward, and I think, you know, the critical elements as you think about your path forward in terms of the analytics process and journey, I think for us does boil down to maturity, what your strategy is, and ultimately embarking upon that journey. And I think the two organizations together are going to do a great job in helping end-user organizations figure that out, particularly on the provider side as well as on the payer side. So, you know, Tom Davenport and I started the International Institute for Analytics over 6 years ago, and really centered around answering some fairly simple and specific questions. And I'll just introduce a few of those for you all on the phone today. You know, how carefully do you think about your data assets? How carefully do you, you know, nurture, groom, gather, and care for those data assets the same way you do for physicians and folks inside your organization? Do you feel like there is a cultural understanding of what it means to make data-driven decisions? Do you have the right people in place that are necessary to make all this work? Graham obviously referred to the technology. It's a critical underpinning. The data assets you have are critical, and yet the highest performers that we at IIA track are doing something extra. They're doing something different, and they're understanding that this truly is a cultural transformation, and we'll get into that as we go forward here. So quick background on IIA. As I mentioned, Tom Davenport, who's the author of two important books over the past 8 to 10 years, the first called Competing on Analytics, and the second called Analytics at Work, and I started IIA about 6 years ago. Well, over the course of that time, we've now grown to support about 130 enterprises around the globe. About a third of those are in the healthcare space, some area within healthcare. And ultimately, the vision here is that every enterprise at some point must make a decision as to how they will compete using data and analytics. You compete in a variety of ways today, but we would argue that you must add, if you do not think about how you control and manage your data for better insights, higher market share, better patient care, for example, you're going to be behind. And so that's really the central thesis, and that's the central vision at IIA. Thought I'd start with 2 or 3 just what I'll call environmental slides, or almost topographical slides here, to give all of you a sense of how thorough and how deep this disruption that's happening in healthcare is by what we call a group of digital natives. These are companies that were largely built in a different era than many of you on the phone today. In the last 10 or 15 years, they literally built their companies. The advantages that have accrued to them are tremendous. Advantages, so they don't have to live with legacy systems. They don't have to live with legacy thinking. And we'll talk a little bit about how to cure that gap. But one piece of evidence here in terms of just how what's happening is the pace of venture capital investment across the healthcare space. So what you have across the horizontal axis obviously is years, and then along the vertical is the total investment amount. 10 to 15 billion now being put by venture capital firms into the healthcare space per quarter. Per quarter. The last time we saw those kinds of investment levels were back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, before the bubble. But this is real. There are a lot of, the investment community is very serious here. Just in the first quarter of this year alone, some examples here around these kinds of investments. In the wearable space, in the population health management space, helping consumers with both payments and finding care. So, you all have heard a lot about what Apple's doing in terms of the Apple Watch, what Jawbone is doing. Well, these startup firms are really attracting a lot of capital, and they're starting to sort of eat around the edges of many traditional provider and payer organizations. Big brand name company now, Health Catalyst, has now raised over $100 million in terms of investment. This year, $70 million alone, to compete to sort of meet this ACO trend in population health management. Interesting new entrant, and doing basically their entire business based on the data and analytics that they control. So without going through each of these digital natives that are increasing and that are coming up in terms of the competitive landscape, just take a look at the actual target areas here that are being, in a sense, targeted and eroded by a lot of this investment and by these organizations that are really using data and analytics to compete against traditional providers. Mark Andreessen, kind of a major investor in Silicon Valley, a month ago said software is eating the world. No matter what area you might think about in healthcare, someone is there looking to revolutionize that either patient experience, operating approach, whatever it might be. So, this can be viewed, I think, by traditional organizations as a threat, as a problem, as an alarm. But for many organizations who have now said, no, we're going to join and compete on analytics the same way, the answer has been, no, we're going to react. So, quick case study here in the western part of the United States. Providence Healthcare, sort of a traditional provider organization, third largest in the United States, 160 years old, 600 facilities now in the United States, the third largest provider network in the U.S., 82,000 employees, right? Just kind of going about their business. And out of left field comes an interesting new digital native and an interesting new competitor. Instead of being 160 years old, ZoomCare is 10 years old. They have not 600 locations, but just 33 locations, right? And they have grown over the past, call it 10 years here, based entirely on a new data-driven service model. Their approach is to just focus on the urgent care market, on demand, even serving patients without insurance. This efficient model is essentially reducing the friction that patients feel when they go to a traditional provider organization. Right? The relationship is with a set of local providers, not a dedicated physician, and we would argue essentially the relationship now is with the phone and less with the provider organization. So what are they doing different? What is so different about Zoom Care? And how are they eating away a little bit at Providence's market? Well, they've often been called the Apple Store or the Starbucks for healthcare. The aesthetics are designed very much around a consumer retail experience. That's something new for traditional provider organizations, almost the aesthetics of a Starbucks. They're vertically integrated, right? So they're actually putting all of these various items together, sort of training, coaching, dental, wellness programs, all sort of vertically integrated. And they are taking what we call a segmented or retail type approach rather than a traditional wholesale approach to the marketplace. So, as I mentioned, the key tool in their arsenal is the smartphone. It is the consumer smartphone. And that enables the patient side to find their own location that's convenient for them, not be limited to a single location. There is sort of on-demand scheduling, so sort of fulfillment here. So there's very little wait time for the patient. They've just introduced an on-demand Skype type of a chat with doctors, which would alleviates the need to go into an actual clinic here. And there's much more broader access to patient records by patients here to kind of take their own care into their own hands. Now, lest you think that the traditional provider isn't paying attention and isn't reacting, you'd be wrong. So you do see Providence responding here. Now, we would argue that, it perhaps is a bit too late because some market share has been given away to this digital native, to this new competitor who's competing on data. But Providence is responding. They do have the ability to have now Skype-based coaching. They do have the ability to schedule your own appointments. And obviously, MyChart is a very popular service now among many traditional provider organizations. So kind of a quick tour, if you will, of this case study between a traditional provider and a new digital native who is, number one, targeting a very small niche targeted area, right, in the urgent care side, number one. Number two, entirely building their business around data and analytics. Everything is digital, and they are masters of managing that data. That is the key differentiator. One case study among many that IIA is constantly moderating and is constantly seeing among the 130 enterprises that we support today. So some examples in front of you from the healthcare space. These are all brand organizations that IIA supports today on the left side. And just a quick sampling of the kinds of questions that these organizations are facing today. These are what we call inside of IIA inquiries. How do I calculate and actually defend the value of analytics projects? How do I actually get budget, and how can I show a return on investment? How do I help my analysts pursue a career path? How do I find the best talent? How do I recruit the best talent? On the technology side, we're seeing a lot of questions around machine learning and the concern around automated decisioning, particularly in the healthcare space. Are there risks there? How have others outside of healthcare built what we might call the modern analytics technology stack? What do we do about the cloud here? Should we trust it, or not? Are there efficiencies there that we should be taking advantage of? And in taking kind of a wireless, a cell phone metaphor, do we have an opportunity to leapfrog ahead in terms of transitioning our technology infrastructure into more modern, generally cloud-based environments? So is that cloud-based environment actually really cheaper? Sure, the sticker price between buying a piece of commercial off-the-shelf software versus renting that capability in the cloud on its face may be cheaper. But is the total cost of ownership in moving to the cloud really as compelling as the Amazons of the world will tell you it is? So this is just a sampling of the kind of questions we see. A couple of highlights: University of Pittsburgh Medical Center Group, both the plan side and the provider side. They were recently the winners of our Excellence in Analytics Award, the 2015 Annie. Dr. Pamela Peel and Oscar Mariquin at UPMC accepted that award. At Intermountain Healthcare, Lee Pierce is busy building out his team and their capabilities. Cleveland Clinic Partners Healthcare recently, publicly made some fairly significant investments in technology, helping them understand what was the right technology vantage point. At Dignity Health, a few years back, Dr. Kalarafi and his team embarked on a very, very clear path toward becoming an analytical competitor. And the commonality among all of these folks, I guess, there are two commonalities that I would point out for everybody. Number one, they've all begun the process understanding what their current maturity level is. They've created a baseline for themselves. They've created a baseline because without a starting point, it's hard to know where to go. Right? Back to our compass metaphor earlier, without a starting point and a path, a direction, any path will do. The second commonality among all of these folks is every one of them is rated as a top provider organization or payer organization by pick whatever rating agency you'd like, U.S. News and World Report, but every one of them is at the top of their market. Now, that could be coincidence, but we would argue it's not. We would argue that a firm, clear, durable focus on an investment in analytics and data is actually correlating to higher performance, higher patient outcomes, higher financial performance, higher operating metrics. The other commonality among all of these folks is that the CEOs of these places, Toby Cosgrove at Cleveland Clinic, for example, is walking the talk. He is requiring everybody inside Cleveland Clinic to use data to make better decisions. We'll come back to this in a second. So let me just pause there. Graham, I presented a fair amount here, that thus far. Any thoughts on what you've seen so far?
Well, obviously, thanks, Jack. Yeah, that's right. I think that everyone, I would imagine that everyone who's listening in here has their own, they're at different stages, I guess, on that maturity curve. Some organizations have invested heavily, others are further down the journey than perhaps some others. But my feeling is, as you say, the challenges that people are wrestling with are fairly similar, regardless of whether they're one of the larger healthcare delivery organizations with a huge amount of funding, or whether they're a much smaller organization, or even a vendor that's trying to supply capability to these organizations. I think they're sort of somewhat stuck in first gear, trying to figure out what is it that we do to scale this thing up.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's a perfect lead-in to the slide that's in front of all of you now here, which is we often say this is a journey that is very much worth the effort, absolutely worth the effort, but also not for the faint of heart here. And I think the key takeaway is there is no question that the spending on technology is here to stay and it will continue. Every organization is spending heavily on technology in the world of big data and analytics. And yet, statistics will tell you that about 70% of analytics projects fail to meet their stated objectives. Not fail altogether, but they fail to meet some hurdle of success. And here's the secret. It's not because of the technology, right? It is actually because of more cultural elements here that we see all the time. A lack of a clear strategy, lack of a corporate culture that actually supports the technology and the innovation, and candidly lack of people and the necessary skills. However, this is a learnable process. This is an area that is developed enough now that the high performers playbooks are now available to all of you. This is a process that is not just reserved for the digital natives. It is a process that can be learned. And I think that's an important point that I'm going to end with as well, just to remind all of you. So we've talked a lot about analytics maturity, and I'm going to transition quickly here now to introduce two important frameworks that we think all of you on the phone today can use to actually measure and benchmark your analytics maturity today. The first is called the 5 stages of analytics maturity, and the second is the Delta framework. And as I mentioned earlier, these two frameworks were introduced in 2 important books, Competing on Analytics and Analytics at Work. I would recommend those as really the guidebooks, if you will, to thinking about how do I measure my analytics capabilities. And we've developed then, we've used these 2 theoretical frameworks and put together, we think, a fairly rigorous approach and methodology to actually understanding what your analytics maturity score is. So let me begin with the first of the 2 frameworks. It's called, the first is the 5 stages of analytics maturity. Think of this as your yardstick. Think of this as your measuring stick. How do we think about, good, better, best, that kind of thing. So if you think about the world in 5 stages, every great framework has 5 stages or 5 elements to it. Moving left to right here, you begin with what we call analytically impaired, up through localized analytics, enterprises that then at stage 3 have what we call analytical aspirations, up through something called an analytical company, which we'll talk about, and finally nirvana is what we call the analytical competitor. Let me just add a couple of sound bites for each of these to walk each of you through as you think about your own organizations. Which of these stages describes where you think you are today? Analytically impaired, literally not data-driven at all. Data assets are perhaps there in your organizations but highly disorganized. There's a broad culture of gut-based decisioning. We've been in this business forever. I've seen enough patients to know about a certain outcome. So literally an organization that I would argue is, if you stay at that level, your days are numbered. I'll be that frank, right? Not asking analytical questions. As you move up into stage 2, and you start to see some intentionality, some aspirations here. So generally, we're not talking about anything very advanced. There's a lot of reporting, and reporting is siloed into functional or business units. Up through analytical aspirations, now you start to see some senior leadership that is supporting this culture. There's an understanding of how to calculate and actually how to evaluate the return to the business, if you will, to the enterprise based on the investment in analytics and data. An analytical company is just short of perfection. Highly data-oriented. You start to see senior leadership and board level actually integrating analytics into setting the strategy. Analytical tools are widely available. There's an adequate amount of staffing, both at the highly quantitative data science level and also the business analyst level. There's some attention toward training the broad group, the broad business person, physicians or operating folks inside of a provider organization on how to use data to make better decisions. And finally, stage 5 is what we call that analytical nirvana. Analytics is literally pervasive throughout the organization. And of course, what comes to mind here are these, what we call digital natives, the LinkedIns, the Netflixes, the Amazons of the world, the Googles of the world, who were literally born, just recently, if you will, in the grand scheme of time. And their entire businesses are built on data and analytics. So if that's your yardstick, if that's your measuring system, what do we believe are the right characteristics or areas that really you need to be thinking about? And I'll go through these fairly quickly here because I'm going to introduce a set of 33 unique competencies within each of these categories as well. And obviously, all of this is available to all of you on the phone for further reading. But at the highest level, we think that the modern analytics program really needs to excel in 5 key areas. Data and technology, the breadth, the quality, the level of integration of your data. It's the foundation of your house. It's the very foundation of everything you will do. Second is the extent to which you are approaching analytics at an enterprise-wide level. We see time and time again enterprises who contend we're very good in one particular area, but there isn't an enterprise-wide appreciation. Leadership, I mentioned some of the CEOs of leading healthcare organizations a little earlier. Unless there is a passion and a commitment to this culture change and a requirement by leadership of all employees to use data and analytics better, you're not going to succeed. Targets, that's simply a word that talks about, are you actively looking at the highest value application areas for your data and analytics? That may be improving emergency room throughput. That may be closing your books more quickly. That may be patient outreach. Whatever those target areas are, there is a group or there's a set of thinking here that prioritizes what we might call the lowest hanging fruit, right? Those areas where if we could make a 1 or 2 or 3 point improvement, there would be huge payback to the organization. And then finally, the A of Delta is the people side. It's analysts, right? Do you have the professional data science type community, but have you also trained your physicians and your operating teams on how to use data and analytics better? So taken together then, these 2 frameworks work in coordination. So I mentioned 33 unique competencies. I will simply just show them here, and again, all of this is available for future reference. As we think about bringing these 2 frameworks together and actually assessing and grading and scoring firms, we use these 3 competencies and we measure 2 important things, what we call importance and effectiveness. Importance and effectiveness. And I'm generalizing here, but essentially what we're really measuring is the effectiveness of your analytics capabilities meeting the expectation or the level of importance that you place on each of these capabilities? And ultimately, whatever you decide your level of commitment is, that is the level of importance, are you actually living up to that? And we'll come to that here in a second. So if you take those 33 unique competencies, data competencies, target competencies, leadership competencies, and ultimately after you've gone through your scoring, what you really are looking for is a prioritized list of actions that you can take. So in this particular case, what we're doing here is we're actually plotting for each client these different competencies on an effectiveness and an importance grid on the left here to try to actually filter out what are the highest priorities, where are the areas that perhaps you're over-investing. In other words, where are the areas that you're neglecting and where are the areas that you're potentially over-investing? In this particular example, which is fairly common, you can see that the top 6 initiatives, the top 6 competencies that this particular organization would need to focus on are in the data category. How trustworthy is the data? What's the quality of the data? What, the lack of analytical tools out there? How well is the data integrated? How consistent is the data? So by doing that, we're able then to actually present to an organization almost their go-forward plan, their set of action steps going forward. So with that then as background, what I thought I would do today, Graham, is to actually share with everybody some real-life scores from the healthcare industry and from some other industries that I think you all will find effective here. So broadly speaking here, again, 1 to 5 staging, generally if we were to snap our fingers and be able to benchmark every enterprise around the globe, our sense is that most are going to find themselves in this localized analytics stage. But what we've also done then is painstakingly built what we call an assessment cohort So the real live data, the median actually is about a 2.7, 2.69. But I'm also going to share with you then today some results of a recent market leader market study that I think you'll find interesting, where you'll see that the median is actually a bit higher, significantly higher. This comes back to the point that I was describing earlier. Are high performers using this as a way to get to that high performance? Something to think about. So in terms of just the methodology we followed, because I know we've got a number of analytics folks on the phone here, in terms of this market leader methodology, just very quickly, we went out and actually surveyed and assessed about 75 unique organizations across 10 industries, and I'm going to share those results with you here. We shortened a bit of the Delta competencies in terms of what we were surveying for, from 30 down to 17. But here's to give you a sense just across all industries that IIA covers, in addition to healthcare. So you'll see some healthcare brands here in front of you, KP, Anthem, and so on, right? If you then, based on that, presenting then what we call a set of industry indices. So let me describe just a bit about what we're seeing here. Right, left-hand column, obviously you have the industry groupings, different kinds of insurance, up through automotive and airlines, and then at the very top, I've mentioned the digital native group. Okay, so again, the different stages here, the lowest end stage, the lowest possible score is a 1, and the highest is a 6. So the median score for the digital native group is not yet up into the 5 area, which we'll come back to in a minute here. So let me then just, based on the fact that we're working with a healthcare audience today, highlight for all of you then the industries that I think are relevant here. It's pretty revealing. Graham, you and I have talked a lot about these results, these industry indices, how providers, again, not great news that broadly speaking, both the provider and the payer side pretty far down our rank. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, it is interesting. I don't think we'd be surprised that pharma and medical device companies are more advanced along their analytic maturity spectrum. But you might have thought, again, a lot of the folks who work in healthcare provider organizations might think, gee, I would expect that we would have flipped there with the insurance. We'd be less mature. And it'll be interesting to see, I guess, how that changes. Obviously, there's health insurance companies are having to move out of the business as usual mode due to the pressures that have been brought upon them in some of the changes from the ACA. And obviously, we'll see what happens as we move into a Trump administration. But I think that the belief is, within health insurance companies, no doubt that they have parts of their operations team or member services team, whether it's actuarial or underwriting teams, that are going to be strong. But if you move into some of these other areas, network management, marketing, sales and business development, direct-to-member services, it's really been an industry that hasn't evolved that much. As I say, it'd be interesting to see, Jack, over the next year or two, whether they move up that maturity spectrum.
Yeah, and at our Chief Analytics Officer Summit earlier this year, we got that very question and around, is this opportunity or is this bad news, right? Is this good or bad news? And boy, I think the headspace, the running room that is available to healthcare is greater than any other industry. So I wouldn't be distressed by these results. If anything, I think the opportunity is great. One other way to look at the data then, which I find fairly interesting, is we presented the median scores, but if you look then, the median scores are then along the horizontal axis here. What's interesting in some sectors, say utilities and telecom, how closely clustered the players are. But what you see in the healthcare insurance side and a bit on the provider side is there are some standout, excellent organizations here that are scoring fairly high, right? Who are reaching out above the median. And to me, what that says is there's an understanding, right? There is some intentionality, and some of these higher performing organizations are seeing, we're getting great advantage by making these investments. So one of the things that you see then let me just focus quickly on the digital natives. I can't tell you how many times we are asked, tell me how we can become like Amazon. And the answer is we say, well, it's a long path, it's a steady path, and you can't overnight jump from a stage 2 to a stage 4 or a high stage 4. But let me highlight, we'll reveal one score today, which is a 4.94, which was Amazon's analytics maturity score. So what is it about Amazon that is so interesting? First, they're not an analytical competitor. They're not even up yet in the highest stage. Very close, but a 4.94 puts them just short of excellence. What do we see about Amazon that's striking? Number one is the consistency of their scores across all of the Delta competencies. Right? You can see overall their score is a 4.94, but they're uncanny in how consistent across their analysts, their targets, their data quality they are, number one. Number two, they're not very satisfied with where they stand today. So if you take a look at the three circles in the top right part of the slide here, 83% of folks they grade themselves, 83, very high score. It's almost like a net promoter score here. We must maintain our competitive advantage using data analytics, and yet they only get a plus 58 and a plus 52 in terms of satisfaction in the actual competitive rating, right? So the point here is that they are not satisfied and continue to invest. In fact, there are certain areas where our results came back where they felt they were actually that they were underserved in terms of the investment amounts that they were being put in, which was very surprising to us, because if any of you has been on an Amazon and done any searching or work with Amazon or purchasing, they give themselves poor grades in terms of data capture. Wow, if they're not doing it, I don't know who is. But interesting to see what keeps them so high. It's a consistency, and obviously, if you listen to Jeff Bezos, he talks about this all the time. So three different then sort of what we call opportunity landscapes, and I thought I would just share this with all of you to give you a vision of what you might receive if you were to actually get your analytics maturity score. This is a digital native output. Okay, this is one of the highest performers. So you take all the colored dots here, and they are, what we call in the northeast quadrant here, right? So they're actually funding to the level they want. In fact, there may be more than enough funding in some areas. Now, if you go to pharma and medical devices, you can see how, in fact, this reflects their median score. Solid opportunities in analytical tools, executive utilization, data integration, right? And then if we look quickly at the payer space, solid opportunities and some very high opportunities. So the inverse of this is we're seeing pretty low data quality, pretty low data trustworthiness, very poor skills in terms of prioritizing projects and opportunities. So without getting into too much detail here, this kind of gives you a vision of where you might rank were you to actually have your analytics maturity score. So Graham, a couple of implications that we see coming here. There is no question that there is significant difference in terms of analytical maturity between this digital native group and the broader group of operating companies here. What does that mean? It first means that certainly they are ahead. But what it also means is that this is a craft that can be copied and can be learned, right? The maturity can be learned and repeated. It's not just reserved for those folks. These high performers are continuing investing, and they're not slowing down. But the kind of brands that I showed you earlier are also investing at the same rates, okay? So as with any market maturity, there will be some group that gets out ahead, but eventually with time, the traditional players catch up, right? And the last thing I'll leave you with here is this is really a change management issue. This is really not about how many boxes I can buy, how many tools I can purchase, right? This is about culture change management. The highest performers are insisting on this kind of behavior throughout the entire organization, and they're really seeing the results.
Yeah, very good. Thanks very much, Jack. And so again, I'd really like to thank you for the tireless work that you do to promote the value of analytics in every industry. We heard about that. You work with digital natives right the way through to those who are at the beginning of their journey. But thanks also for the work that you're doing with the healthcare groups. We heard about some of that work and some of the awards that some of those teams have won that we can learn a lot from. So Jack, you and your team, I know that you help the industry. You also help us at Sutherland navigate our own digital journey, and you help our clients navigate theirs. And as I travel the U.S. Talking to customers, actually internationally, as I hear a recurring theme, I said it before, many of them think that they're stuck in first gear. They don't know what they need to do. They recognize the need to adopt digital. They want to transform, but either the funds aren't available, the talent is in short supply, the leadership buy-in isn't there, the data quality is poor, the vendors overpromise, and you name it. I've heard it. So I get it, and I wish I had a silver bullet, but there isn't a silver bullet. This is hard work, just like any of the things that we do. But what I can offer you is the following advice. I would say the ready, fire, aim approach will disappoint you. Those who invest a little time assessing their readiness and maturity will outperform those who don't every single time. So first, establish a baseline, understand where you're starting from. Second, don't design your system to solve a theoretical future problem. Start with problems that you have. That goes back to the T of the Delta model that you were talking about. So that's pick the target, start with problems you have, and use the design thinking to help prototype and iterate rapidly. You'll recognize value sooner and dramatically reduce the risk of failure and start to get proof points for leadership to show that this is a journey worth investing in. And then third, of course, I would say it, but get professional help. Work with the best, work with organizations like Jack, work with Sutherland, where we've helped digital natives as well as leaders in each area, regardless of the business that you're involved with, whether it's healthcare, retail, or otherwise, is work with those with a track record of helping make best companies in the world even more successful today than they were today. So, and how do you do that? There are four main phases that we would recommend. None of these are rocket science, but you need to discover and assess and gain buy-in, and that's around aligning leadership, understanding the issue, assessing prioritization. Identify those top opportunities. Where do you get the biggest bang for the buck? And where are you ready to provide solutions? Plan and build and start to deploy. Early stage prototyping, and then operationalize. Now, to do that, though, again, I'd say it's worthwhile considering the capabilities that you have. So at Sutherland, we've chosen to invest in dedicated innovation and design studios. Initially in our London offices, but now in San Francisco. We have teams of people comprised of analytics experts, ethnographers, videographers, data storytellers, usability experts, graphic artists, domain specialists, software developers, and agile software development leaders. So the model that I would say is consider this as a journey. You're moving through from a discover phase where you're figuring out what your baseline is, understand where your opportunity is, design for that, and think holistically about it. Use modern design techniques to do that iteratively fast. Build a solution, get feedback rapidly, and then deliver that. Between Jack and Sutherland, we can help you at every stage of that journey, and I'd break that down into three key areas. Jack talked about this idea of understanding your analytic maturity. This is, get your map in place, understand where you are, understand where you're trying to get to. So we can work with you to help you establish a baseline report that is peer benchmarked across the industry and across our industry, but also others. You get your benchmark and recommendations on where to go. You participate in a network of peers who are interested in sharing information. Help you with your analytics journey. This is the idea of working with your teams in a design environment to look at your capability, develop a roadmap, and to help you establish the business case and the ROI, and then to work with you on solution design, innovation workshops, and these insights as a service. So encourage you to reach out to us. Thanks again, Jack, and thanks for your time today. And I think we have some time for questions, Ashley, so we'll wrap with that.
We do. Thank you, Jack and Graham. So we're going to open it up for questions. As a reminder, please use the questions section in the GoToWebinar panel to submit your questions. The first question that I have, I believe you've already answered at the tail end of the presentation, but to repeat in case you want to expand, is that our organization this is the question, our organization from an analytics standpoint is immature. Given that, how do we get from stage 1 to stage 2?
And Ashley, it's a great question. This is Jack here, and we at IIA get it commonly. And the advice that I would give is don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to eat the whole elephant at once. Short, quick wins that get attention toward the value of analytics is really, I think, job one in getting from stage 1 to stage 2. You're really gaining a lot of urgency. You're creating urgency. So don't be tempted to think, again, to reiterate what we've said before, that you should go shopping, that you should go out and buy a whole set of tools. What you're really wanting to do is, number one, form your set of targets, make them short, quick win type projects so that you can gain notoriety. And as we often say to chief analytics officers, you'll go from having no line out your door to a big line out your door once you've gained some credibility and you've shown some value.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that, Jack, I think you covered it, is do it within the framework. So understand the journey that you're on, so that every one of these quick wins isn't just a throwaway. Do it within a framework. Understand where you're moving towards. Understand how it fits into your data maturity and your talent journey, and pick those. And then, as you say, do it quickly. Get buy-in from the organization, and then leverage that asset as you move forwards in a strategic way.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, between the stages of maturity 1 through 5, at what point, at what stage do you start to see organizations shift or really rationalize the concept of begin with the end in mind versus let's fix our immediate problems now so that we can continue advancing from stage 1 to stage 2 and onward?
So Ashley, again, a good question. This is Jack here. Beginning in high stage 2, early stage 3, you begin, I mentioned it during the call a bit, you begin to see integration of analytics and data in the very corporate strategy. And I think that's the inflection point where you move from putting out fires and just improving, kind of a bottom-up approach, to getting the top-down support that really leads you up into the higher stages, into stage 4 and stage 5. So the organizations that we see who move over time from high 1, low 2, up into mid 3, generally what we're seeing then is that the board of directors is involved, the CEO and executive team are very involved, funding moves from being divisional to central funding, right? And obviously the size of the team grows quite a bit, and you begin really just broadening the perspective and picking bigger and bigger target areas that are really critical to the organization.
Yeah, and what I've seen, and it'd be interesting to see what the folks on the phone are thinking as well, but is that where I see people who are really moving up that maturity curve is that they're open to outside-in thinking. So as you start to do the projects that Jack was talking about, listening to other industries, understanding what they're doing, learning how they went through that journey, bringing some of those learnings back into healthcare and realizing healthcare isn't all that unique in the end and that there's lots that we can learn. Many leading edge organizations are now bringing people in from the outside who had been chief technology, chief analytics officers from whether it's retail or manufacturing and other organizations. That really infuses some new thinking, and it gives the level of thrust, I think, to some of these initiatives so that it moves beyond business as usual. And of course, in the end, as you said, Jack, these things aren't aspirational. The rubber hits the road on a day-to-day basis. Understanding, the pragmatic approach to going through the specific steps of the business case justification, the actual workflow analysis, the process transformation that's going to occur, the anticipation of the return on the investment that you're going to make. Those are all of the types of things that we get deeply involved with our customers, because just sort of setting an aspirational target doesn't help. And helping them just actually block and tackle through the entire solution is what's needed. So I think I'm just reinforcing what you said, Jack, but outside-in thinking and working with an organization that's done it before that can help you so that you're not reinventing the wheel or just cutting your teeth on this new process yourself.
Okay, great. Thank you. A question from the audience just came in. We are in a med device space. Data is siloed in different departments. Number one, how do you think that I could convince the value to different stakeholders? Number two, how do you convince different stakeholders to collect more of their data and open up their data to others?
And sorry, was the question from someone who's working in the medical device space? Is that what? Is that the
That's correct.
Okay, great. Actually, I'm not sure why I clarified that, because it really doesn't make any.
It's really
it doesn't really make any.
Good universal.
It's a great question, and so my feeling is that the way to do that is to pick a use case, something where you have domain level understanding of the potential transformation that could occur. Think about the as-is state. Think about the to-be state, and then if you're thinking about how to start to bring senior leadership on board to try and improve your data collection, your data asset, the data quality, deep understanding of the reason to invest, is that, again, what we found is sometimes it helps to bring in an external expert. I would say that, of course, but if you bring in someone who's had experience with other industries, you have an objective point of view, you have someone who has the tools to be able to help you make the case, and we have the techniques to then be able to pull in some of your senior leadership or your middle management to help you with understanding objectively what you're trying to get done. And that might just be a 1 to 2 day initial workshop, which I think just helps you to make the case and to help you really make sure that the design of what you're trying to accomplish is going to make a bottom line impact, so that senior executives in the organization start to jump in on that. So it's the question runs deep, because obviously it's like, how do you really go make this thing happen? And the case that we were making today is it's a tough thing to do on a day-to-day basis. We think that we can help.
Yeah, and honestly, this deck may help as well. The same person asked if he could get a copy, and as a reminder, yes, everyone will receive a PDF version of today's presentation. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jack.
That's okay, and actually we may have some more questions here, but this is at the very foundation of who owns data. Is it an enterprise corporate asset, or is it a divisional asset? And what we commonly see is that at some point there's a carrot, but at some point there may need to be a stick here that says, thou shalt share your data, right? We often see what we call these underground data economies, where folks hoard their data, whether it's under their desktops or in their divisions. And at some point in that high 2, early 3 maturity level, again, what you see is some central organization saying, wait a second, right? These are corporate-wide assets. Let's not forget that.
And the journey, again, I've seen it happen in a number of organizations, is that most people don't realize how damaging that siloed model is. People are working in the detail, which I imagine that it's possible that the person who asked the question is working within the department in the detail, is they get it and they understand the challenges. So a lot of times what we end up looking at is, what's an overall data management and information management governance strategy? What happens in terms of data stewardship? How do you make the case for that, so that you can show that as you start to get control of your infrastructure, your data assets, and across the enterprise, it's a reusable asset that provides benefit across the organization. That case needs to be made to senior leadership, and we can help make that case, and we've done it on a number of occasions before.
Great. That was our final question. So at the top of the hour, I'm going to conclude our webinar. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, Jack and Graham, for this interesting and very informative presentation. One final reminder to the attendees, watch your email for links to the recording of today's webinar, as well as the PDF version of the PowerPoint presentation. We look forward to seeing you on our next HIS Talk webinar, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Ashley. Thank you.
Thank you.